they really like threw the time off, and there's like a video. I'm like in the back of like the video.
Oh,
of
you're
Knocked
checking
Loose.
your
I'm
watch?
in the back. I'm just like, because I wasn't even sure how long they were gonna play, so I'm just like, dude, every band after is gonna be so mad.
Bitch, I'm from Kentucky, but this ain't no fucking Dixie Chicks.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. I am very excited to be welcoming someone that I see doing a lot of really crucial work and really amazing work in a very underdog kind of scene. So I'm very excited to be welcomed by Ryan of LDBFest. Thanks for coming on, my friend.
What up?
So, Ryan and I got to cross paths semi-recently. It was, quote-unquote last year, but that's kind of the dad jokes that are starting to happen now. But we crossed paths for Promcore 2021 and didn't get to have as much like interaction and FaceTime because, you're playing 3 sets, and then I'm filming the rest of the bands, including yours. So it was a lot of running around, and but afterwards we've been able to shoot the shit a couple times over Instagram, and I've pitched the idea a couple times to have you on the podcast, and I feel very fortunate to have you on, as you are someone that I don't see as getting out into the limelight and trying to push things. You are very silently like working behind the scenes and letting your work and what you're doing speak for itself. So I think there's a couple things that we can kind of break down there. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself as far as the podcast music talks, and we have to check some bevs before we get into the meat of the show. So it's tradition here for the guests to go first and check a beverage. So tell me what you're bringing for liquids wise.
Before we got on the computer, I ran and got just a drink from a coffee shop, just an iced latte. Even in the winter, big fan of iced lattes. I don't really like hot drinks that much.
Yeah.
So that's what I got.
What's the local shop?
It's this spot called the Heine Brothers. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's
it's like, I don't want to give it a full on plug, but I'll like mention it at the very least.
Yeah. It's all right.
Got you.
There's definitely some better spots, but we moved like a month ago, so we're like further away from the better spots to hit. So
yeah,
kind of slumming it.
Yeah, that's a little depending on your lifestyle and depending on how close to the inner city that you want to be. Usually the inner city of any metropolis, if you want to call it that, usually has the more go-to spots that if you want to tour, that's what you're seeking after. But the further outside the city, if you're needing more land or depending on so many different factors, the coffee, the trip to get good coffee is usually more and more and more. So sometimes you have to make that at home. Yeah,
it's a bit obnoxious.
Absolutely. Well, despite it being as frigid as it is, I am going the opposite. I'm doing a hot related drink. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the show, Ryan, but we have a couple of beverage sponsors actually. So we have today we have Say When, which is it's a chai like concentrate mix.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my go-to, the dirty, which is kind of like a mix of you got your like organic coffee, and then you got some warm cocoa, and just like it's kind of the closest to an actual like coffee without being just hit in the face with a bunch of like espresso. So I just do that as like a 1-to-1 mix in this coffee mug, because it's that like cold outside where it's like everything is iced over, so it like looks really nice when it's like Christmassy time, but like not nice on your skin when you're trying to let your dogs out. So
pretty cold out right now.
Yeah, like Calgary specifically had like a bit of a cold snap. I went out east to visit some family for Christmas, and then coming back, it was like minus 40 degrees Celsius, which is I think like in the single digits for Fahrenheit. So it's cold as fuck.
Damn. Yeah, here it's been like 70 degrees, and then like 24 hours later it'd be like 30 degrees, and then 70, and then
Right.
30.
Yeah.
It's been awful.
Yeah. I one of the things with Calgary as well is that we do have those fluctuations, but it's with these things called Chinooks, which is essentially like warm air that's coming over the mountains here. So you'll have like minus 25 degrees Celsius, and it'll be plus 3. And so like everything, like it's nice to have a little bit of a break, but then it actually is like terrible for the roads because everything becomes all slushy and then it freezes over again. And yeah. All the people that are in the southern states that don't experience snow and what people in the Midwest or even in Canada have to go through on a daily basis or on a yearly basis is I envy those people for sure. So as far as the time of recording this, it's actually the very first podcast of 2022. Have to get used to saying that year. I've already misspelt it a couple times. But yeah, very excited to have you on. LDB Fest is kind of coming up, and the question of festivals and some of those things are happening. Obviously, like the time of recording this episode, like FYA Fest is happening like this week, and so there's like a lot of things that people like you and who put on big scale events are like really in the so many decision-making processes and trying to figure things out. So we'll definitely get to that. But any new guest on the show, Ryan, I always ask kind of like their origin of how they got into just this whole world. So take us back in time and tell me some of like the moments initially that put you onto punk, put you onto hardcore, put you onto metal, and we'll kind of ease into the convo there.
All right. Well, let's see. So I'm originally from Indianapolis. That's where I started going to shows and such. I was from the suburbs. I didn't live like directly in Indianapolis. I was like the oldest of my friend group too. And so I didn't get to go to shows a lot until I was like 17, 18-ish when I like finally got my license and such. So a lot of the music I got into for the longest time was just like through MySpace and Facebook and through like what other friends were listening to. So I liked everything, literally everything. I would listen to like metal, hardcore, deathcore, like all of it. But then after I started like actually going to shows, my music taste started to refine. I liked, punk, it's classic to be like, some of the earliest bands I got into were like Minor Threat and Youth of Today, which was true after I got out of like metal and stuff like that, because those are just like things you see easy off t-shirts and stuff. So I'd see bands at on t-shirts at shows, and I would look that shit up. And I just, from there, it's just a deep dive, exploring all kinds of stuff. That's pretty much like how I got into music, was more the internet until I was able to go to shows, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The power of the t-shirt at a hardcore show is something I've talked about on the podcast multiple times. And just like, when you're super green and you're just getting into things, anything as far as a cool logo or design, you're just like, what is that? And it sounds like you really took it upon yourself to actually like go down the rabbit hole and find those things out.
Yeah. I don't know. I was always pretty interested. I always liked reading. I don't read now, like at all, now that I'm in like, I don't know why, but when I was like late teens, early 20s, I like to read. So I'd also read a lot of those, like the like classic, like history of hardcore and those like type of books. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And was that just because you, it wasn't in a sense of like, oh, I need to pay homage to the elders and like learn a lot of this before I can get into it? Or is it just like you were just fascinated and wanted to know?
Curiosity, honestly.
Sure.
Yeah, just like curiosity. I just thought that stuff was cool. I don't know. I guess it was a bit different than what my lifestyle was growing up when I was younger. So I was sparked by it.
Yeah. And maybe it's a generational thing too. Cause I think, for me, I like loved watching band documentaries growing up, and that could be hardcore bands or like one of my standout ones that I always revisited multiple times was all the DIY like Parkway Drive documentaries that they would do, and seeing
I know what you're talking about.
how much that band like hustled and grinded over the years, and showing like we flew across the world to play like to like 40 people, and then like a couple of years later now we're like headlining one of the biggest metal festivals in the world or whatever it is. So to see that progression I think is really really important for the average hardcore goer.
I agree. And one cool I know what you're talking about. One cool thing about that band is they always like made a point to go to like countries no one else would go play.
Yes.
Like they would just go to the wildest spots and play, and people were like, I remember in the documentary people would be like, they didn't even know the words, but they were just like humming.
I totally remember that.
And, like I definitely remember watching that documentary.
Yeah, they would either
insane.
hum the choruses or like the guitar riffs itself. And I feel like that's an ultimate win if you can
that's just crazy.
Break the language barrier through your guitar riff melody. So I think that's very sick.
Very wild.
Yeah. It's kind of that like classic it's almost the equivalent of like the A Day to Remember, like Downfall of Us All at the beginning of the song, where everyone's like, like that. That's almost the same kind of effect for what people in other countries were doing. So yeah, that documentation is really important for me, and I think that there's new ways that people are like learning about hardcore outside of just going to a fest or a show. Like there's things like hardcore podcasting now, like different interviews, like there's different ways that people can kind of do the research and bridge the gap between the generations. So I think that's a very crucial thing there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you started to kind of learn a couple things. You know, being born and raised in Indianapolis, like how did you eventually make your way to like Kentucky, and like was there like a family thing in the mix, or that was like a conscious decision on your end?
So the reason I ended up in Louisville is when I first started the fest, you know, we didn't have I couldn't find like the perfect venue for the fest because there was just nothing the size I wanted that would allow me to get away with things that I wanted to get away with, being like a small DIY fest. That's how I met Alex. She like commented on something about a show at one point, and so like I kind of acknowledged, you know, that she was from Louisville. And I was like, hey, I know there's a Louisville, Indianapolis connection. Why don't we do this fest together and do it in Louisville? And we were able to get a venue. So that's how I got into Louisville and how the fest even started, actually, and how me and Alex met.
Yeah. So yeah, we're jumping ahead a little bit, so I want to make sure that we capture every detail. But I like the connection point of like you living in a different city, finding a connection point between those, and then eventually being drawn to be pulled out in that direction. I think that's seems to be a common thread with a lot of people in hardcore. Like maybe you're dating someone in another part of the world, and that eventually brings you to that scene to start X band, which ends up becoming a huge band. And not even just like on a relationship side, it could be anything from family, a job, even just like, I think myself, and I can attest for other people in Calgary hardcore, I think there was a lot of cool things happening here that attracted me to when me and my wife were discussing about moving more west towards her side of the family. I was like, well, if we do that, I definitely want to be in Calgary because there's a lot of cool things happening hardcore wise here. So, and I think it's also a healthy thing to be able to live in and be a part of different hardcore scenes versus just your like hometown or where you discovered hardcore. I think, you know, there's an element of learning different perspectives. But let's just jump back to you and the start of LDB. So, you know, it's pretty interesting how Alex just had like a comment, and that just kind of sparked your interest of like, hey, here's someone. Like, was it something that she said that was like, oh, this person gets it, or like like I'm just kind of curious, like what caught your eye or ear?
So jogging back now, because it's starting to get to be a long time. I do remember. So what it was is I had a show booked. It was like a 4th of July show. It was, I actually think it was 2 tours coming through Indianapolis at the same time. And originally I had like a spot for it, and like we lost the spot. And I was like, I think I made a post. I was like, oh, we lost the spot for this, but we're looking for something else. And I think Alex was like, oh, you could always do it in Louisville. And I mean, we hadn't even really like crossed paths yet. I think she just happened to see the post, and I was like, oh no, I'm still gonna do it here. But that like, a few months later, that like I kind of remembered that, and that was how all of that became a thing.
Yeah. And just for the people that might not be from the Midwest or some of those geographical neighboring states, how far away is Indianapolis to Louisville, driving wise?
It's like an hour 45 to 2
okay.
hours.
Yeah. So yeah, that's
super close.
It's definitely like you're making an extra trip, but it's not like we're planning an entire day's worth of getting to this new city.
Yeah, no, it's not too bad.
Got you. Okay, so a show kind of sparks the idea. You put that idea in your back pocket, and then a few months later, it's like, hey, let's do this. And maybe even just going like even deeper into the origin of LDB. Like what was the initial idea for you to do a fest of not this magnitude? Because I think every year LDB has grown and grown, and I know that there's like some past history to LDB Fest itself, but talk to me about like the why personally for you of why you wanted to do this.
I guess part of it, I think, is I'm kind of an ambitious person, and at the time I had just started getting into booking shows and such. But I mean, like the shows were obviously always cool in Indianapolis, but I felt like there wasn't really like anything like real big representing a lot of my friends, not just from Indianapolis, but just like from surrounding areas. And like, don't get me wrong, there was like other stuff going on in the Midwest. Like, I don't think we just like started doing something that no one else was doing or anything. But I mean, I don't know. I just felt like something needed to be built in our area that helped represent people. And, at the time, like, I didn't think we'd be where we're at now, or even booking some of the bands that we book now. Like, it's pretty crazy. I'm like super thankful for like what we've built and everything and the support we've gotten. But I mean, I was just trying to like put on for my friends, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that you're definitely right. Like there's other things that have been happening in kind of the neighboring areas, whether that's the Rumble or Snow and Flurry Fest or like things like that. But I do think that if it's like for your state or even just like your general scene, like I think that there is one of the best things in hardcore, in my opinion, is like the ability for you to see a need and just fill the gap and not really ask permission and just kind of like do it and have people embrace the idea and all of those things, whether it's booking a fest, filming shows, starting a label, whatever it is, like obviously that needs to come from like a good place versus like this, twisting of the mustache of like, oh, I'm going to do this and then that's going to make, this happen and then I can benefit from this way. But if you're just coming from a place that like you love hardcore and you want to do X, Y, or Z to give back, I think 9 times out of 10 people will gravitate towards that and help build up that thing with you. And so was that kind of like what happened with LDB, is that people were like, oh, here's this void that hasn't really had a true representation. And I also think that it's, it's funny that LDB is at a size now where people almost like goof on it in a sense like, oh, like I'm going to this part of the country for a hardcore fest. But I think that is such a really cool thing. Like I literally would have had no plans in my life to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, but to be able to do that for Promcore, I think is like a nice way to bridge that. So, that's kind of a two-parter as far as like, what do you think LDB has done for just like Kentucky or the city of Louisville? But also like, how did people initially latch onto the idea of this fest coming to be?
Luck, I guess, honestly. Like, as far as like, like anyone could have like started a fest and like it could go one way or the other. I think that just having friends helps, or like, I think a lot of people saw what we were doing and just wanted to be a part of it, maybe. A lot of it, like, I mean, I had friends and stuff, but like with Alex joining, like that definitely like boosted a lot of stuff because she had been touring with Another Mistake. She's been out. She's met a lot of bands. She's met a lot of people. So I think that I think a lot of people also saw what she had been doing in Louisville for like a long time already because she had been booking shows since she was 17. There's the Chestnut House. A lot of people remember that. So I think, what I had going on, plus a lot more of what Alex had going on, people were just like pretty hyped on it and wanted to just, be a part and support.
Mm-hmm. So it was almost like two waves essentially coming together and then making a super tidal wave.
Yeah. No, it definitely was. It was not like just me. It was a lot like of just combining two cities that had already, had a big history together, and a lot of like, there's a lot of friends from both like Jim Barron's from Indianapolis, and there's other people from Indy that live here now.
Yeah. So maybe we can just kind of highlight that because I think it is always kind of that thing where I think one of the most visible, I'll use that term, festivals in the hardcore landscape as people are getting into it is This Is Hardcore, mainly because Sonny has been documenting it very consistently, and it's grown, and just different viral moments and all these things. Like, as someone who like was getting into hardcore many years ago, like watching the Turnstile and the Power Trip and the Code Orange sets to kind of like, whoa, like hardcore can be at this magnitude. But it was always a thing where Joe Hardcore and like his contribution and how he was like putting that fest together. It wasn't like he would be on stage and waving his hands like, everyone look at me, look at what I've done. But it was so apparent through people thanking him and him being mainly on stage for a lot of those things. I think when I started to watch some of the LDB videos that would come to light, everyone would always mention like, shout out Ryan and Alex, shout out to these people. But I feel like the difference there is like Joe is like someone like Joe is very present on social as far as like putting themselves out and talking about different things. And I see Ryan, you and Alex maybe aren't doing that as much as like, this is the fest, it's sick, and then people go to it and it becomes, so it's almost like letting your work speak for itself. So I'm just kind of curious from your perspective if there was just like a, not like we want to do this in this way, or if it's just not like the thing that's most natural to you, if that makes sense.
So definitely the like first like 5 years of the fest, me and Alex were definitely way more like on social media and like out there, because we definitely had to like be out there and be like,
sure, yeah.
We weren't just,
you had to
like,
ring the dinger bell.
We weren't just like instantly a success. We definitely had to work a lot, every year and stuff. When we were grinding, like the first few years, like every week, like making posts on the internet, being like, buy tickets, yada yada.
Right.
So I mean, like early on, we were like way more out there, and like we were like booking like full time for years, like shows every week, every month, yada. But as we're both kind of getting out of like booking full time, we don't really like book shows because we got other people here that's way more into wanting to do that now, like, which is sick. We're just kind of like, I don't know, pulling back from the internet and kind of living our lives and such.
Sure.
I mean, like the fest has gotten to a point where it can like, just exist, and we don't have to like be on our like personal accounts being like, check this fest out, and like, right. I don't know. I think we can like pull away from having to, I don't know, exist on the internet. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I just living my life.
Yeah. But I think it's the work that's been built up to that to be in a position where it can be like, I can post this and know and be pretty confident that like I don't need to like check this every couple days and make a repost about tickets, because I know that like the the lineup is strong, and I know that we have a bit of a reputation now where I don't need to handhold it as much and let it just organically make its rounds almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe let's just talk about like just the curation of what it takes to actually do like a fest of that magnitude, because I think that there's a lot of something that I've heard very commonly about LDB Fest is the value of the diversity of bands, and that could just be genre or just like the people who are actually playing on stage. And as someone who's not maybe in the mix of booking shows myself, and maybe only scratched a bit of that, like how do you and Alex and the other people that you're involved in like sit down and make decisions as far as who you reach out to? Because it's been talked about many times on the podcast, like a band might come up and be the hottest shit, and then they could just be kind of in the valley with everyone else. Like, it's so many things are at play, and it's very important to be have a pulse on it, but like at the same time like make certain judgment calls. So I'm just kind of curious where your mind goes with that, and how you and Alex kind of work together to make something that like makes sense and speaks to as many people as possible.
Well, so
easier said than done, I'm sure.
Right. So this year, this is the first year that has been done a little differently. One, because we added Colin, and Julia has been helping as well, and so like that gave more heads, in the room to try to figure out a lineup. But before this year, how we always used to do it was it'd take forever, but we'd get a poster board, and just for like months, like if we came across something, we'd jot it down. And so we would have like, by the time it came to start like selecting, we would just have a board and be like, what makes sense? We'd try to like, you have to like pick headliners while also trying to find, like good support for those headliners that would make sense. But you also want to like, you want to mix things up. You don't want to just do all of like the same band both days. But we also like, I mean, it's not easy, honestly. We really try to make sure we're like giving a variety while also like, having staples of the fest that we like to have around, kind of often, just to keep it that feel.
So you would have actual Post-it notes and you would like stick it on a wall and be like,
no, just one big poster board.
Oh,
and just
okay.
Sharpie everything down.
Gotcha.
And then we would like start cutting it down from there. But it used to take us months. I mean, it still does now even, but we used to just like really take our time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, it is like you said, it is something that it has the most amount of impact, especially when you announce it on the day, because so many people are like, wow, like so many bands under one roof, that's so sick. But it is so like important it's so easy just to say, oh, I'm just gonna put all the top hype bands on one fest, but then not maybe taking into account like, oh, this is like a purely metalcore day, and then it's like everyone's tired of hearing that, and you don't have the bands that are the palate cleansers that kind of bring in a new audience of people. So yeah, it's like a multi-month excursion of like having an idea and then potentially even scrapping the whole idea and then starting from scratch and trying to do all these different things. What is maybe one of the not riskier plays, but a band that you booked maybe that you're like, I believe in this, but I'm not sure how people are gonna gravitate towards it or understand why we're putting on so and so, but it actually worked in your favor very, very well?
Honestly, like, I don't want to say we've never like taken risks, but I mean, usually like when we book the lineup, we're pretty confident in it.
Sure.
Usually, we don't ever really expect anyone to have a bad set, which like very commonly like everyone usually has a good set, and even like openers, people always show up early. So honestly, like I don't really think there's been like a weird risk where we're like, I don't know, this seems kind of dicey, might go well, might not, like just because like we put a lot of time into this. So like if we think something's not going to do well, I feel like we'd rather just not, because we don't want to waste our time and like a band's time if they end up like thinking they had a bad set or something like that.
Right.
Like, which is usually, which a lot of people notice is, which is usually why we don't do reunions, why we don't do like old band reunions or like things like that. We just try to keep it fresh. I don't know.
Yeah. So maybe let's just hit on that. Like, why, like, was the why behind that to just kind of focus on like, this is hardcore in its current state versus like, here's like the reunion for all the old heads to kind of come back into the mix. Like were you looking at like other fests like, okay, you guys are doing that and that's cool, but that's not something we're going to focus on?
Yeah, we definitely didn't want to like, we didn't really want to steal other fest vibes. Like a lot of fests, like they're usually able to get a lot of people out because they're doing reunions and, you know, seeing bands they wanted to see and stuff like that. I mean, we didn't really want to like be another fest booking reunions and such, because that gets done a lot, and people, I don't know, I feel like people wouldn't really want to come to the Midwest to see a band they just saw like in New York or
Sure.
you know, California or something like that. Like no one's gonna want to travel. I don't, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like Chicago's cool. Like Chicago's a big city, so they can get away with that because, you know, they have such a huge population. A lot of, if they book an old ass band, like either they're gonna get people out, but Louisville's not that big of a city, so you spend a bunch of money to get a band to do a reunion show. It's not probably going to do that well, in my opinion.
Yeah. Was and maybe the only, I guess, consideration if the band is like from Kentucky itself or like from Louisville, like doing something like that makes sense versus like we're having a reunion of a band from California all the way over here. Like that, it totally makes sense that you guys you're like, that's not a battle we want to fight. Like that's not our fight per se.
Right.
You know, so talking about like the curation of this of the lineup, you know, there's like genres to consider, but there's also like the diversity of like where these bands are actually from. So I know like the 2020 lineup definitely had a lot of California presence. So as someone who probably started it out in a way, like you were saying before, as like, this is just for my friends and to kind of put on for our, you know, our close-knit scene, how have you kind of scaled up and you're like, okay, this is always going to be for Louisville, but, you know, we want to bring these bigger bands all the way over here. Like, when was kind of the jumping off point to kind of like, you know, include more bands from other parts of the world?
Probably when we started doing it at Riot. So the year before, I think World of Pain played. The year before that, I think the last year at the Cure.
So this is 2018.
Yeah, 2018, okay. I'd say. I think that was like really when we started to like book a couple like outer like far, because I think that was also the same year that God's Hate played.
Oh, okay.
So that, you know, like that year 2018, I think, was when we started to like be able to, you know, book bands. We started getting more money, so we were able to pay bands more from further out. But 2019, the year that we had the first year at Riot Skate Park, that was definitely when we, you know, we were like, okay, we're really growing. We're really going to be able to, you know, start flying in bands and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say that 2019 was the year that we finally were like, okay, you know, we've been doing the same thing for like 5 years. You know, we've been venturing out a little bit, but now we finally, you know, we have a big enough following and enough money that we could start bringing bands that don't come through the Midwest as much. And that's like, that was probably when the fest went from like booking a lot of my friends' bands to still booking friends' bands, but also trying to get like bands that people in the Midwest want to see from the coasts and stuff like that don't come through as much.
Right. And I think I didn't touch on this when we were talking about the different genres of music, but the Midwest is largely known for being a very like open to a lot of different branches and styles of heavy music. So it's not as like, oh, this isn't New York hardcore, I'm gonna like stand outside for this band. Like it seems like everyone is very welcoming to, bands that will play in standard to drop a sharp or whatever, whatever in between. So I think it's very cool to again like recognize like, hey, this band might not go out of their way to book a Midwest tour, but doing something like this might entice them to it like at the very least come out, but in a better scenario, maybe they actually plan an entire run to LDB Fest versus just like a flying kind of situation.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really interesting thing that I always like to ask people that book festivals or shows, and this brings me back to when I had Aaron from Promcore on the podcast. Like what goes into actually like catching your ear or catching your eye when it comes to bands? Because I think the way that festivals and bigger shows are curated, I've seen that shift change from like, here's this form that you fill out and then we'll consider it and then we might put you on, to like, I know what is hitting and what's important to me, and then kind of making those steps. So and please share if there's like some common missteps that you're like borderline brain dead on when it comes to people asking you about like, hey, how do I get on LDB, and like some of the missteps that bands like, A, what catches your attention, and B, what are like annoyances that you find when it comes to booking such a popular festival as LDB?
So one thing I'll say is I have like a strong lack of knowledge about like the music industry and how like a lot of that area works. So when we started the fest, I didn't even know there was like such thing as like submissions for a fest.
Sure.
Like I literally did not know that's how that works. So the first few years we'd always get like, how can I submit? How can I submit? And I'm just like, man, I don't know. We just like kind of already know who we kind of want to play. Like we just didn't ever take submissions, which like I guess like, further like getting into it, like kind of like made us look like assholes, but that is just honestly more of like a lack of knowledge on those things. I didn't want people to think that we like, I don't want anyone to ever think we weren't like not taking into consideration things and stuff like that. But that was just how like we were rolling. Like since the start was we just kind of, we didn't want like outside influence on who we wanted to book for the longest time. So like we would put a lot of it together without even like telling our friends or like anything like that. I don't know. What really catches my eye on bands personally is energy.
Okay.
Just like if the band has energy, that's like the biggest thing. I obviously like, I get bands are going to like want to, shoot their shot or whatever, or like, cause you never know. I mean, like you could message a fest and you might catch somebody on a very, like, oh, you know what, like, let's check it out or something. So like, it obviously like is really rough and like hard to deal with when I get like literally like hundreds of messages a year about like the like it's just like tough because
like the minute that the dates are announced, it's like like it's just
my inbox instantly like every year, like as soon as I like say something. And I feel like that's like kind of one of the reasons why we both started getting off the internet a little bit personally wise, is like every year like you make one post and they just start your inbox, like Twitter, Facebook, and it gets hard to deal with on that. But I mean, I don't want to say like that never works, because like there has been, just like once or twice where that like has worked for a band. Usually just like, I don't know, just like a strange moment. But we have kind of started taking submissions now as a fest a little bit, just because like that's just like, I don't know how things work, I guess, a lot of times as you get like a little bit bigger. So adding Colin Feeney has been a big help, because he has all of that knowledge. So that's been really awesome this year. We kind of have stepped up in that realm as far as just, walking the line.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's break down each of these individually. So just off the sense of like what catches your eye, you mentioned energy and like what a band is like it's, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's almost like, is this band winning me over? And I have no preconceived like understanding or knowledge of that band, but they have won me over in this 20 to 25 minute live set. Is that kind of where it is for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so sometimes like I like to check a band out first live.
Sure.
So if I notice a band online, but I'm like, oh, I haven't listened to them yet, but I know I'm going to see them in a month or like in a few weeks, I'll definitely like wait and just check them out live without even listening to them. Just cause I want to see like, how, if they have energy and such.
Right. You don't want to have any like, oh, well, I listened to it and then it almost disappointed you in a way. I'm very, very much the same when it comes to like the filming the bands that I do. Cause it's like Promcore, I maybe only knew like a handful of the bands. And I definitely knew that there were certain people that were like excited or like, you have to go listen to so-and-so. But I love that like super raw, authentic experience of just like the minute the band rings in their guitar and just like being hit with like, holy fuck, how have I not been in the know about this band? And then it almost makes a better lasting connection point to that band once you have that proper live experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I pretty much like, if a band, even if I've seen bands who have like a lot of energy, but who may not like even get like the craziest reaction because like sometimes that's band's first time through and, not a lot of people have checked them out yet. So like, I definitely try not to like base off reaction from the crowd, but if the band's got like a lot of energy and I think that like, they're playing well and such, like it's definitely usually like one of the bigger things.
Right. Yeah. And I think when the 2022 lineup was announced, and I'm kind of like looking through to see like Ballista and Omerta, and then knowing like you saw those bands at Promcore and two bands that like really brought it on like the live aspect. Yeah. And had great reactions. So I think, and maybe there was already decisions before or maybe after that, but I think some of those things that's really cool to hear that there's a if you're crossing paths with someone, it's not like bring it extra, but just like that's a perfect reference point for you to be like, okay, I know this band is going to bring that same level of energy, if not more, if I'm putting them on my fest.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's jump to the second point, just as far as the annoyances and like some of those things. And like you said, like you're trying to give everyone the benefit of the doubt and believe that there is some value in shooting your shot. But I think there's almost like there's a weird gray area of like trying to hustle and like being like bored. It's kind of that thing where it's like, well, just knock on the door until someone answers. It's like, well, what if like you're knocking on the door and that person is so annoyed with you that they move out of that house and they're not even paying attention to you anymore?
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So, when it comes to I know one piece that Aaron brought up when he was on his podcast that I really, really liked is like, if your band wants to play X Fest, coming down to X Fest when you're not playing it and just supporting it is like, that speaks volumes about like, hey, like we don't want to just play this for ourselves. It's like, we want to play this because of like what we see as far as the impact it has in the umbrella of hardcore. So, has there been certain things where like, if you had to put it out to like the hundreds of people that are DMing you about like playing LDB, like what is like the one thing that you would say, you're doing this, but I would actually like you to do this for me to actually like pay attention or even just consider paying attention?
Honestly, like a lot of times just like, I mean, still, even with like submission stuff, like a lot of like 99% of the time, it's still just like something we come across or like something we notice. And so like, if you're trying to play, I mean, like we're trying to like now with like the point that we're at as a fest, I think like one of our bigger goals is just to support younger, like, you know, bands that are touring now, since like we're like, I don't know, at a bigger step up than we were like 3 or 4 years ago. Really, like a lot of what we look at now is just like bands that tour, because we're looking to support, you know, up and coming bands that are touring, and then bands that have been doing some touring. So that's like a lot more of what we're looking at. So like we don't want to like, besides like obviously like headliners who have been around and people want to see those, like a lot of like the midsection of the fest is just, we're just trying to support bands who are trying to, you know, do their thing and be out and touring and such.
Yeah. And I think I think with anything in hardcore, and I try to say this as much as I can, and I think it applies to a lot of things in life, is like have zero expectations. Like just because you messaged Ryan on a Tuesday at 3 p.m. doesn't guarantee that he will see that or should respond to you. And it's the same thing with like, as I find Scoped is growing, there's more people being like, "Hey, we dropped this single. Can you put it on a Spotify playlist?" And you know, going back to what we were talking about earlier, there's times where I'm like, you know what, I am going to check this out. And then I discover a band like Fox Lake, and I'm like, oh, this band's really, really sick. And then I get to become friends with a lot of those bands. But it's able to always like always show up and try. And trying isn't like a week-long excursion. It's almost like a year-long thing of like trying to like do different things to get different people's attention. And then all it takes is like one moment that like turns the wheel over and creates a new dynamic for your band. So I think the expectation of like, hey, we put out this thing and so many, like, just dial that way, way, way down, because there are so many bands that want to play a big fest or have a cool opportunity like that, but no band, even the bands in Louisville itself, deserve like a spot on the bill. It's kind of on you guys to curate something and curate in a way that's fair and showcases a lot of the bands that are coming up. And again, it's like, it's no simple act. I'm sure there's every year, are you guys like I'm sure that the stress level of just doing something at this scale now is just maximized, and it gets more and more intense for you.
Yeah. I mean, as you get bigger, I mean, there's more to lose. You want to grow at like a good rate, because one thing we've been worried about is like growing too fast and then booking a year and it not being great, and then like, you know, no one comes out. So like one thing we've always been trying to do is just kind of grow gradually. I know that a lot of people for the current year that's coming up that we just announced have been like, oh, you know, there's like a lot of bigger names, but this year's kind of like special because we missed a year already. And we added Colin and such. And so like we wanted to just do kind of a bang out year this year, and just like, you know, who does everyone want to see? Like, let's have a celebration. You know, we're able to do this again. So this year is kind of a insane year for like a reason. Like we just really wanted to, you know, book a lot of big names, because we, you know, Incendiary has never even played Louisville before. And that's a band we've been trying to get for a long time. So like, you know, we have ideas already for the following year that's going to incorporate more of what we've always been doing, which is some more, you know, smaller bands. But I mean, even this year, we still have very fresh young bands and upcoming bands and such. I know a lot of people were giving us a little flack for having a lot of New York bands, but I guess unless you have no idea who Colin is, that would make no sense to you.
Sure. Okay.
But
so that's
Colin's
his,
from Long Island.
Well, okay. Gotcha.
So like, you know, I mean, we wanted to make sure if we added somebody, to the fest, that they had just as much right as me or Alex to like, throw in ideas. And so this year is a very cool, mixed match year with like New York, who like, I mean, we've booked bands here and there from New York, but this year is really cool because it's like a 3-way fest, with 3 people in it this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's puts a cool spin, I think.
Yeah. So you brought up the word celebration, and I think it's definitely a year, a lot of festivals, I feel like you guys kind of like just slid by with 2020, because that was just before kind of the age of the pandemic and all those things.
Yeah.
I had a lot of friends that went down to LDB that like jokingly were like, oh, I like, and it happens with any festival you go to, you're not hydrating and you're just around a lot of people. So a lot of people were just like, even before COVID was in the conversation, they were like, oh, I got the LDB plague or something like that. Like they were just so sick.
Yeah.
But that being said, like a lot of festivals didn't have that opportunity to do any festivals in 2020. And I'm sure, any of the, festival or even promoter people who are listening is like, 2021 is still like a question mark with a lot of things, and there's a lot of unknowns still. But when it comes to the enjoyment of doing something at the scale that you're doing, because you're in charge and you're running a lot of things, like how do you actually make time to actually enjoy yourself when you're at the fest while you're probably putting out a multitude of fires that probably don't even see the light of day, because you're trying to handle things?
So it's not always enjoyable, I'll say that. There's like definitely always something going wrong, no matter like how smooth shit is.
Mm-hmm.
Like the last year, when we let Knock Loose do a secret set, they really like threw the time off, and there's like a video. I'm like in the back of like the video.
Oh, you're checking your watch?
I'm just like, because I wasn't even sure how long they were gonna play, so I'm just like, dude, every band after is gonna be so mad. I mean, everything went great, but just there's always something going on. I don't even know. I'm sure some people noticed, but the 2020 fest, the stage broke like 3 or 4 times, and we had like people going under, like in between bands, like rebuilding the stage so that like,
so not the whole thing, but just maybe a panel or two.
Yeah, because they were like I don't remember, they were like 6x3 panels,
right?
You get like one of them and like big crack like down the middle, so we'd be getting like plywood and like 2x4s and just like drilling them in like in between bands and stuff.
Wow.
There's always parking's always a disaster. There's always something going on, but
yeah, I mean,
it's definitely difficult to enjoy. We don't sleep for like 3 days, like 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, like from like that Wednesday, because we always have the pre-show on Thursday. So really like 4 days, like you get a couple hours of sleep that Wednesday night, but like Thursday's Madhouse, Friday's Madhouse, Saturday's Madhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't sleep because you want to see everyone that Saturday night.
And then there's an after show, and then people got to get home, and you got to, it's...
Everyone wants to get brunch on Sunday, but you want to sleep in, so you don't sleep Sunday either.
Yeah, you're like, can you order me something and bring it to the fest so I can eat it in between bands?
I don't even get to eat.
Yeah. I just love the visual of like a band playing and stepping on a panel and just going down like it's like a Mario level and just disappearing.
We've had some very funny stage issues. Like the second or third year, a band was playing and someone broke the stage, and it was like just a massive hole. And another band was playing, and the mom of one of the members was like a little tipsy walking on the stage while they're playing and fell in the hole.
Oh no.
It was like totally okay. Like it wasn't, but we've had a lot of stage mishaps over the years.
So, obviously there's no like hardcore fest for dummies like textbook that you pick up and read and you iron everything out. Like I'm a firm believer with anything that you do, whether it's like creatively or career wise or just life things in general. It's kind of like a life lessons learned the hard way at times, and that like failures and missteps and mistakes actually teach you more than the successes. So maybe just asking that like very general, like what's maybe the one biggest lesson that you've learned with LDB Fest, and that could apply to the fest itself or just how you handle yourself in life. I'm just kind of curious on like the ongoing opportunities to rise above and act and learn from different things and how that's impacted you.
I would say the biggest thing that I've learned while doing this fest for the last almost 10 years is be very respectful to everyone. To be honest, like, don't burn bridges, don't like make enemies for like a stupid reason. You know, a lot along that lines, just be respectful to bands, to people, make sure you're doing everything right, the right way. Be cordial. That would definitely be the biggest thing. It's just over the years, just making sure to learn how to talk to people
right
in the business and such like that. And I definitely would have there's definitely been some mistakes where I wish I had stayed cool with people versus losing my head on like dumb stuff and shit that shit that I shouldn't have even had an opinion on and just stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like to really like strip it down, like when you're booking a festival with 30 bands and then 30 times 5, roughly with the amount of members, like that's a lot of different relationships that you're almost forcing yourself into, and so many different types of personalities and ways that people are going to communicate differently to you. And so there's that, plus the hundreds of people coming to the festival. So like there's a lot of responsibility on you and Alex and the other people involved to make it like an enjoyable time, and not like it's not on you to like be everyone's best friend that entire weekend. Like a lot of the things are going to take time out of your day, because you're like, oh, I can't watch this band because I have to put out this fire and I have to drive so and so to the airport and I gotta resolve this thing in the parking lot or whatever it is. But I think that that reminder to people that like everyone at a hardcore show is a human being and has different bandwidths of social time and the ability to be DIY and problem solve, but giving a lot of people just grace and to your point, like being able to be respectful, because you might be booking X amount of bands, but you don't need to be like the best friends with all those bands, but you could still be like, hey, thanks for coming to play, you guys killed it, or whatever it is. And it could be as simple as that versus like trying to get mad and have an argument and a blowout, and like you're saying, that burns a bridge where that could potentially be mended and utilized later down the line.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Obviously, with a fest and with so many different things happening, the stage breaking is one thing. What was maybe one of the most unexpected things that you never thought would happen at LDB Fest that you, again, had to, put on boss Ryan hat and handle in the mix of that? But you're like, I could have never even anticipated that this would happen.
I guess so. One of the craziest thing that's happened to me, at least at the fest, is I got kidney stones.
Oh,
yeah. So so the second day of the fest, I got kidney stones, but I also I got like dehydration sickness. Like I was like throwing up. I didn't eat enough. Like I said, you don't get to eat like ever, which like now I do a better job of like the most previous year and stuff. But like I wasn't drinking. and at water, like anything I wasn't eating, and I was eating like pizza, which is just salt and cheese and like so like I was just like destroying myself. And leading like a couple weeks leading up to that, I was drinking a lot of like energy drinks, which I don't even drink energy drinks anymore because of the kidney stone. But yeah, so I had to miss like half of the second day of 1 year because I got kidney stones. So that would be something I never would have thought had happened, and that was awful. I ended up like catching I think the last two bands of that day, and I was like, it was a bummer because I was on like morphine because it was just like, because I was dehydrated, I think it affected me so much worse because there was just nothing in my body, and they were like, I think they were trying to pass through, but I had no fluids in my body, so it was like tearing me up. Like just I peed blood for days because of that, which was just like the craziest thing. So that would be the craziest thing. But as far as like, I guess, music, I don't know, like as far as like the fest going,
I don't know, that kind of takes the cake because I was expecting something external, like so and so came and they brought this, and then this transpired. But it was like, no, actually, I did not take care of myself enough. And the stress, like, I think stress also plays a huge factor in creating the intensity for a lot of health things. But just being like, something internally went wrong with you that actually made it like harder to do the fest that year. But oh my gosh, I did not envy you in that situation at all.
It was awful. I mean, as far as like other things that arise, like, there's always going to be a fight or something like that you deal with, but that always gets dealt with like by other people. Usually end up just helping chill that out. So like usually I'm not even involved with like, what am I going to do to break down a fight? Like, not really anything.
You're going to put someone in the LDB timeout zone? Like,
right. Yeah, exactly. So usually like those just like people just try to help talk those through. We've had some sound issues that people like didn't know, or like the stage issues. Like that was actually pretty crazy because we're literally like sawing 2x4s like behind the stage, like and stuff. That was pretty wild. Usually like things as far as that run pretty smoothly. I will say like the last 2 years when we did it at Riot, the biggest disaster always was parking, because like that area was just not enough for how many people were, like nearly 1,000 people were parking for, that year. And then you got bands and stuff. So like that was probably the biggest disaster the last 2 years. I don't think parking will be as much of a challenge this coming year though, because it's more inner city. So it's just be street parking.
Yeah, it's like find it how you will and prioritize the bands that actually have shit to get inside of the venue and those things. I think hardcore is like a great outlet to just like really teach problem solving and just like really like not complaining about a situation and just like trying to be solution based and try to figure things out. Like some problems arise where it's like, I have kidney stones and I literally can't be here and I need to go to the hospital and get all that sorted out. But most of the time it's like, okay, what are our options and how do we move forward with this? And even if it's as crazy as in between bands of like being under a stage and using a screwdriver and trying to get things, going for the 15-minute changeover for the next band. But I think it is a very powerful skill set that people learn almost not intentionally.
Yeah.
When it comes to I think another big thing with festivals, there's the surprises on like a unexpected or like this is a fire kind of surprise, but there's also like the surprises of like this band wants to do like like you brought up the Knock Loose, like they wanted to play, and that was like a very special thing for Louisville as a whole. You brought up like, look, I was watching that set this morning and you looking at the time and like being like, oh my gosh, like this is gonna just throw a wrench in the whole day, but like still seeing the joy on your face of like a band of that magnitude doing something like that at the fest. I thought that was really cool. But has there been any other surprises? And that could be as small as like someone came up to me and said that they came from X country for the festival, or, you know, this band, you know, anything that comes to mind when it comes to like surprises on the good side of things.
There's definitely so the mid years where we started to get bigger. It was always so cool to like, you know, I've seen us sell tickets to like Australia or like, you know, Asian countries and stuff like that. It's just like super cool to see, you know, Europe. We've got like the UK. Like when we started getting those more often, that was like really cool to be like, dang, like this thing we've been working on for years. Now people from outside the US want to like spend a bunch of money to come like see all these bands that we think, you know, people want to see and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So those mid years, it was always really cool to see that, because like we weren't booking like really big bands yet, and it was still more like, you know, a lot more Midwest bands and stuff like that. So that was always really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even just the thought of like when you do something that actually gets the attention on a global aspect of like, I'm doing something that is putting like Louisville, Kentucky on the map for people in Asia, Europe, Australia. Like, I think that is very, very something to take a lot of pride in, to be able to be like, I'm kind of bridging the gap between these different hardcore worlds.
Yeah, it's definitely been, that's like one of the coolest things to me, is the people, to see how far people are willing to travel, you know, and come see. Which like one cool thing is like Louisville is like a cheaper area to visit, and like, you know, food doesn't cost as much, and hotels aren't as bad and such.
Sure.
So like that's like been one thing that has been helpful, I think, for like a lot of people to travel to here.
When it comes to you know, I also like to ask this question for people, again, of those areas of like, for the people that are listening to this podcast that might already have tickets for 2022, like what's the one Louisville spot to go to? And that could be food related, that could be a tourist attraction, that could be anything. But if you needed to pick one thing that you would encourage people to check out outside of the bands itself, to more kind of experience Louisville as a whole, where's your mind go?
So one of the best spot to eat in town is called Vietnam Kitchen, or like you'll hear people say just VK. That
VK,
like is
okay.
Yeah, VK. So if you're gonna eat in Louisville, that's a must hit spot. It should still be open. They've like for years been on this like back and forth of like if they're gonna sell close down or something like that.
Okay.
But it's still good right now. They're still open right now, but they've been around for decades, and they're a really good spot. And then, I mean, like, it'll be March, so it'll be a little bit nicer. There's like the walking bridge and like stuff like that, like near the water of Louisville. But the stuff that I like to go see is outside of Louisville a lot of times. So, I mean, Louisville's a cool city, but I like to go hike and such, versus like, I don't like hanging out like downtown or something like that.
Sure.
I like to be away from people a little bit more.
What's your do you have a go-to hiking trail that because I've had a couple of people on the podcast that are about that.
Not a specific trailhead, but going to the gorge, the Red River Gorge, which is like an hour and a half from Louisville. That's like a must-do thing if you live in Kentucky. It's so beautiful.
So all the hiking freaks listening to the podcast, you know, make a group thread, plan a trip on a non-festival day, and check out the gorge. That sounds sick.
Definitely.
Yeah, that would definitely be something if I was in the area I'd like to check out, because obviously being from Alberta, we're kind of spoiled when it comes to hiking trails.
Yeah,
being so close to the mountains. So you know, maybe one day, if any of your bands are up here, I can show you some of the spots, because I don't think you guys have mountains in Kentucky.
Not true, actually. There's mountains in Kentucky.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Eastern Kentucky Appalachia. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there
So
is mountains. So that area, like that's what like that area is like. Is it's
got
more
you.
mountainy. Now it may not be like the tallest mountains in the world, but it's definitely definitely mountainy
Yeah,
out that way.
they can be characterized as mountains. Okay. I think
But
sometimes when I think of Midwest, I just think of the prairies of where I grew
yes,
up.
yes, like Tennessee, like Eastern Kentucky. There's a mountain range that runs through there.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, we got it, but it's not like maybe what we're known for. But, I'm learning things here about Louisville here on the podcast. One of the, I'll use that as a subtle segue into some of the bands that you're doing. Something that I notice is that a lot of the releases that have come out for these projects have been in the midst of LDB not happening. So I'm kind of just curious if like you were like, okay, well, can't do a fest this year, so I'm gonna, kind of focus on doing music stuff. Or have you always been like itching to play on the stage versus create the stage for bands to play?
So I only started learning to play instruments 3 years ago. So only about a year before the pandemic. So a lot of that stuff inevitably was going to come out as I was practicing. But, with so many years of doing shows and the fests, for years and years, I've wanted to learn guitar and such. I always put it off just because I didn't feel like I had the time to do it, for years, or honestly, even like the money, because if I wanted to learn guitar, I eventually wanted to try to get on the road and just learn as much as I could. So I put that off. And then, like as I got closer to being close to my 30s, I finally was in a more comfortable position to spend money on gear and such. And so friends convinced me to start playing instruments. So I've been learning that. So like, yeah, the reason why all this, like we had like a bunch of stuff come out is just, we had nothing else going on. And that was what I wanted to do. We were actually, so the first tour I was ever actually on, it was only supposed to be like 5 days. So it's really just like, I don't know, like a weekender, but was in March 2020 during the shutdown.
Right. Okay.
So like the first experience, like I was ever out playing shows and shit outside of Louisville, and we had to come home like a day or two early because
I've been waiting this long, and then this happens. Wow.
Yeah. So, like we kind of like knew what was going on with like the possible shutdown, but we were like, I don't know, like should we just try to go play these couple of shows? And then so we did, and those shows ended up being cool. Like everyone wore masks and stuff. Like that was when people like just started wearing masks and shit.
Yeah.
But it was really cool. No one ever got sick from any of those shows, even the people at the shows. So it was kind of a lucky gamble, I guess. Like when not knowing what you knew, not knowing what we knew now, like we would have just canceled those shows.
Oh yeah,
but,
like the level of
like from the get,
the level of ignorance that any person in hardcore had with like, oh yeah, there's this thing happening over in China, like, and then it kind of like starts here, and you're like, oh, like, is this a thing? And anybody in those first couple months were like, even just the first couple weeks leading up to the shutdowns, like people who said, oh, this is going to be a big thing, were like, are you just fear mongering, or like, are you kind of just driving this thing? But it, like, lo and behold, here we are. But I do think, I don't think that there's any shame on the bands in those first couple weeks of like, can we still go? And then eventually having to cancel tours and then kind of try to play shows on the way. I don't think that I don't think there's anything to be shameful of that, because again, like no one knew the severity.
Right.
Yeah. So going back to the bands, I want to ask that question because that's definitely something that I found with, when you get into hardcore, I think like the accessibility of like getting to play in bands, it is not like for everyone, but it is largely the first stepping point for a lot of people getting into this stuff. And you know, some people don't play in bands and they'll start booking shows, which is kind of like next in line to a degree. And then there's other things that kind of fall into place. But I do think that for me, when I was playing in bands and then I wanted to do a little bit more, so I started scoped and started filming bands. There was like a number of years where like I wasn't playing in bands and I was just doing the overall like brand so like seriously, and then it got to a point where I was like, I need to be on the other side of the lens and kind of doing that thing. So it kind of sounds like it was kind of the pandemic was like, okay, you did 2022, hardcore's on pause for you know, for a moment, but you know, there's an opportunity here for me to also like play in some of these bands a little bit more seriously and write some more music. Is that kind of like, did you kind of look at that as like a serendipitous like, okay, here's a time that I actually do this and I don't have to feel bad about myself for taking a break from LDB?
Yeah, I it was kind of like, while it sucked to not have LDB for a year, it definitely was like a really nice like like we could take a year, like
Totally.
take a year off, because everyone has to take a year off and such. And that did give me an opportunity. I did actually have like a lot of, well, I had some life changes during the pandemic. Like I kind of like switched jobs a few times. And I got like a lot of time to relax, kind of like, obviously like the pandemic was like rough for like a lot of people, and it did suck. Like I didn't get unemployment for like the first 5 months and such. So like it was like hard at times, but mostly I got to kind of just like be at home a lot and like kind of just recenter myself. And I like changed jobs a little bit, and you know, I'm like in a decent job now, and I kind of got to like just step away from the madness for like a long time, and that kind of helped re-energize me, which is like why I'm like doing a lot of band stuff now. But with that, I've stepped away from shows because while like I like to be a part of everything, that like last like solid year leading up to just before the pandemic, I was doing bands and shows and the fest, working full time.
It's a lot.
And it's like, yeah, super ridiculous. And so one thing that I was like really starting to notice is that I didn't really want to do shows, but I also like didn't want like shows to not happen at the same time.
Yeah.
So like I was still like kind of doing shows, but like there's been a big change and someone else is doing shows here now, which is like super sick because that gets me the opportunity to do the other things I've been wanting to do and not have to worry about shows because someone else is doing a really great job, you know, bringing in a lot of cool stuff. And so that really helps me with being able to be in bands at this point.
Yeah, I feel like the you know, you're clearly an ambitious individual, and I think that you have a lot of drive and probably entrepreneurial tendencies, and I think that the people that feel that same way and they start something and they take up that torch and they almost get like, not cursed is a very strong word, but they almost like feel like I can't leave this because if I stop X, like no one will take up the torch and keep it going. And there's almost like a imposter syndrome that almost happens where it's like, well, am I doing this because I want to do this? Or like, am I just doing it to like, again, fill a void? And it becomes taxing in a way. And I'm speaking for myself as someone that like has gone not like back and forth about like, do I want to like, how long will I want to like film shows? Cause like I've been able to scratch all these different itches in the hardcore world through this podcast, through playing in bands, through doing all these different things. And when you do so much, it becomes a lot of time where you can't go on that cool hike or like just have time for yourself at home. And I think that there is, and this is almost like a self-narration for future Spencer to listen to, but I think that there is a lot of value in being able to have time in your day that isn't so wrapped up in the hardcore world to be able to reset and then like give you the juice and the energy to bring it when you're, you know, getting into LDB stuff or like band stuff or different things like that, like to. And I think a lot of people listening are surrounded, like they love hardcore so much that a lot of their aspects of their life is within our world. But I think that there is something to be said about having a little bit of time that is outside of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I agree. I think it's like, obviously, like, love what you love and like and whatnot, but it's always good to like spread yourself out a little bit and like, you know, I don't know, get yourself interested in more than just one thing, per se. You know, let yourself have opportunities to give your brain time to experience something else, even if it's just like resting or like hiking or being outside or reading. But yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, I think that allowing yourself to be human and having that mean whatever it is to you, and that could be like spending time outside, spending time with like my dogs and my family, or you know, even just like playing a certain like style of video game is like your release from being able to do other things. So I definitely encourage people to get involved in hardcore, and whether that's booking shows or filming bands. But I think being able to set a healthy pace, and a lot of that is like sometimes you just go super crazy and then you have to kind of dial it a little bit back of like, okay, this is actually where I'm most comfortable. And I had the adrenaline and the drive to get it this far, but like I need to pull it back so I can just continue to do that for double digits of years versus just one or two.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, this has been a really, really great chat. Just a couple more questions before we start to wrap up the show. You know, I'm remembering when Brian of Knocked Loose came on, and we were talking about like, we talked a lot about that fest on his podcast, but like we brought up the idea of like milestones with the band. So I think maybe one of the more final questions that I want to ask you, as we're this deep into the convo, is like, what is a milestone that you want LDB to hit? And that could be either this coming year or years in the future. Like, what is like the one thing that you're like, I haven't done this yet, but I would like to check that box off?
That's a good one. I don't know, because I mean, like, I feel like we're already like where I never thought we'd be personally. So like, I mean, I don't know. I guess honestly, that's a good question, because I should have more goals for the fest now that we've like accomplished a lot. I will say I obviously want to hit like a full 10 years of like the fest. But we're like already almost there.
Is there like
I don't know, it'd be cool. I was gonna just say it would be really cool to eventually see us sell like 1,500 tickets, you know, or something. I feel like that's a good landmark right there.
Yeah. I love that. I think it's really amazing to see how much I think the overall hardcore scene has embraced LDB Fest and what you guys do and the mission and the why. And I think it's I think I've always been, you know, coming from where I'm from in the hardcore world, like I've always been about the underdog. I've always like, you know, always appreciated when people work 10 times as hard for the same at bat in not being from the most popular hardcore world. So yeah, I would agree that it would be amazing to see, you know, 1,500 people all coming to Louisville, Kentucky to see a bunch of hardcore bands, regardless of the lineup. So I hope that happens one day.
Very cool.
Because then I can clip this part of the podcast and be like, boom, we did it.
Who knows? Maybe next year.
Yeah, maybe next year. Okay, Ryan. Well, one last question before we wrap up. It's tradition to end every episode with a mosh story, and that could be anything that's first to your mind. So that could be something that happened to you, something that you did, something that's LDB related, something that just was at a random show that you were at, whatever mosh related thing that story wise that you would want to end on. Is how we have to wrap up.
So I kind of don't really mosh anymore because a couple years at the fest, like 2019, I think, I broke some kid's tooth on my hand and like gashed my hand open. And I think I broke a bone in the hand because of it. And that really sucked. Like not so much for me, but for like the other dude. And I don't know. I felt like a fucking huge asshole, even though like it wasn't on purpose.
Sure.
Like I didn't, so I don't really mosh as much anymore just because I always think back to that and I'm just like, damn, like what if that was someone smaller or like I did even more? So I don't know. I mean, that would definitely be my mosh story because I think it chipped like straight down to like the dude just had like a small sliver of one of his front teeth. Yeah,
that is wild.
So I felt pretty bad about that, and ever since then, I try not to. I don't really
try to keep it at a minimum.
Yeah. So
I feel that. Well, Ryan, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast. Again, I really see what you're doing for Louisville as a whole, and with all the bands that you're doing. It's clear to me that you're someone in hardcore that's about it and is in it for the right reasons. And I know that it's not normal for you to be jumping on a podcast and be talking about all the shit you're doing for this long, but I really appreciate you making time for me and sharing the story. Anything that you want to shout out, plug, or send the people off with before we wrap up? Obviously, all the LDB info and your links will be in the description, but if there's anything that you want to end us with, the floor is yours.
I don't know. I don't really think I like plugging's the worst because I feel like I could, say like a trillion things for like
sure
everything. But I mean, check out Louisville bands. Two Witnesses, Weapon X is coming up soon. Inclination has new music coming up soon. Three Poisons, Guerrilla Warfare. There's a lot. There's a lot of cool bands from Louisville. So that's my shout out, I guess.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure, for real.
Yeah. I feel very fortunate to have this much of your time. Definitely recommend everyone to go check out LDB Fest, which is happening March. Do you want to say the official dates?
So pre-show is getting announced soon. That will be March 10th. And then the official fest is March 11th and 12th.
Got you. So, if you have the opportunity, get your tickets, go support this very crucial festival. And Ryan, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks again. Appreciate it.